Welcome to OECD Podcast, where policy meets people.
Hello, I'm Clara Young, and today I'm with Seyi Akiwowo, who is the founder of Glitch. Its tagline is "Fix the glitch to end online abuse." So thanks for joining us, Seyi.
Thanks for having me.
There are many forces at work splintering the digital public sphere. Automated bots flood the internet with disinformation, creating confusion. Online abuse like trolling, doxing, and swatting is another way of shutting down civil dialogue. Cyberbullying has become a big problem. It is driving people off social media platforms and sometimes out of public life. Seyi, I use the words trolling, doxing, and swatting in my intro. Can you explain what those are?
Sure. So trolling is just the nuisance, reoccurring, persistent harassment of somebody. And actually that can extend and expand to mob style trolling, so you can be trolled across all your social media platforms, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram at the same time, and that can actually be down to what is called targeted trolling. So your account, a screenshot of a tweet that you said the word feminism, or a video of something you've said would be put up on this forum. Very little words is used. A lot of it is in code or emojis, and it means hundreds and hundreds of people are being whipped up and trained to troll this person whose post or account it is that they're referring to. So trolling in itself has a life of its own. And then doxing is a slang term for documents, which is actually putting online someone's personal information. And actually you tend to see that quite a bit in domestic violence cases. You see that happening quite a bit with young people because they don't realise they're doxing. And actually there was a really famous case of this last year, the #PlaneBay story, when there was a plus size woman who's quite well known on Instagram and Twitter. She asked to move plane seats on the plane so she could sit next to her partner, and it turns out the two strangers that were now sitting next to each other, they were talking, flirting, kind of very, very long story short. You can follow the hashtag. The plus size Instagram influencer was documenting what was happening, taking screenshots, taking photos of what was going on. Didn't once put the person that the people's face make it public. But when she said, the woman involved in the story said that she didn't want the public exposure, she didn't want people to know who she was. The Instagram influencer said that she respected that, but actually she said to her followers, "I'm sure that you guys can work out who she is if you wanted to." So basically giving permission to her followers, thousands and thousands, hundreds and thousands of followers, to find out who this woman was. They did. And they found out where she worked. They found out like her family members, and this woman had to get a lawyer. To put out a public statement because she had now been doxxed. They had found her personal Instagram account, called her a slut. It's a really interesting case of how men and women are received in the media, because the man was invited to Good Morning America. He was able to talk about, is it going to be a love interest? What's he going to do next? Thinking about his career. Whereas the woman, we don't know what happened between those two people. It's none of our business. But automatically, she was called a slut and all other misogynistic slurs, and she was doxxed as well. And I think it can be so easy that people don't realise what doxing is.
What's swatting?
And swatting tends to be an issue that happens in the kind of gaming world, where you've got young people who might be playing a video game, for example, and somebody loses, they don't like it, and they call the FBI or the equivalent in another country and say that this person's a terrorist or has firearms or has made a threat, and then the SWAT team, which is where it comes from, would go in and would search the house and would put them in under investigation. And actually that was a huge, and it still was a huge issue in America. Was discussed a little bit in Australia. Hasn't really been discussed here, but who knows? We actually don't have, here being the UK, we don't have that good enough data, I think, or monitoring of these nuisance calls, but potentially it could be down to swatting.
So you started Glitch in 2017. Why was that?
I started Glitch because I faced online abuse of a magnitude that I was never aware of, and I was really, really frustrated with the response from social media companies, the fact that police teams were under-resourced and didn't have the proper training, and that there didn't seem to be a holistic law or international framework on this topic. And so I ended up becoming this campaigner, and then lo and behold, like this month we're celebrating Glitch's two-year birthday, because we've now decided there's a gap in the market, if you like, to provide advocacy and raise awareness about online abuse, but also deliver training and education around how to stay safe online, how to be a digital citizen, but also how to lobby social media companies to do a lot more on their platforms and provide that duty of care they owe to their users.
About lobbying social media platforms, I think it was in 2016 that some platforms like Facebook and Twitter agreed to a code of conduct in removing offensive material. Can you tell me more about this?
I think it's great that there's been a lot of words said about code of conduct and acting in a more holistic manner. In the UK, we've yet to really see that. I don't really think it's about new policies, because actually Twitter's policy around hateful content, around hate speech, and Facebook's code of conduct are actually pretty decent. I mean, there's always room for improvement. What we're seeing here is not the lack of enforcement of it. What we're seeing here is the lack of transparency around moderators, or the lack of transparency around how quickly they take down content. There's been times when I have reported an obvious violation of the platform from my personal account, which has a blue tick, and from Glitch's account, which doesn't. Glitch will get fobbed off as this is not a violation of the platform, but I would get the kind of special treatment. Actually, why isn't the treatment that those who have blue ticks given to everybody as the standard, and then there are special kind of mechanisms or functions put in place for women in public life who are more vulnerable because their address is public, their whereabouts are public? And we've seen that with the sad murder of Jo Cox MP, and with the threats that have been made to many, many women in public life all around the world.
So earlier this week, there was a debate about online abuse. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, so on Monday, as a response to Katie Price, who is a well-known celebrity here in the UK, her son Harvey has a disability, and the amount of abuse that Harvey receives, or that will appear on Katie's social media but to Harvey, is disgusting and is awful. And so for 2 years, Katie and her family have been campaigning for there to be one law that makes it very clear what online abuse is, and it also takes into account intersectionality of identities, because disability is always forgotten. Actually, on a side, I remember being in Washington consulting on a new framework for women in public life to keep them safe, and actually it was there that I learned that in Latin America there's a huge population of deaf communities that are online, and the abuse that they receive or that is given is actually through GIFs and videos, and it's through sign language. So actually that really opened my eyes to the fact that we look very narrowly at online abuse in terms of just words, and don't even think about like other languages. So this debate on Monday was to the Minister of Digital, asking for a response on online abuse and on a law. This also comes at the same time that the government have released a white paper, so it's the second stage towards it becoming a bill. There's many stages, but a white paper on harmful content. So there's a lot of discussions now about actually what is the government's role in enforcing the law, in keeping young people and generally people safe online, as well as holding social media companies to account. And we're super excited to be a part of this conversation and debate. Part of our recommendations has already been adopted, which is around transparency reports of social media companies, because we have no clue what they do. And actually, if I can be very frank, they've got a really good PR team to still make you think that they're a small startup in their dad's basement. They're not. They're a multi-million, billion-pound organisation. Facebook gets 2.38 billion monthly active users. That is twice the size of Europe and bigger than the population of China. And so it's really good that the government has adopted this. And on Monday, the debate we briefed MPs about online abuse and about our 3 asks, which is around education, enforce and empower. And we are asking for this new levy that the government are looking at to tax tech giants like Google, Twitter and Facebook. We're asking for some of that to be ring-fenced to end online abuse, because this new tax is going to generate £400 million a year. We're simply asking for 1% of that to be ring-fenced towards ending online abuse, towards education, towards empowering civil society groups that know best, that are delivering frontline services and training and enforcement. Because like I said earlier, there's no point having these legislations and these policies and these laws if they're not enforced.
We talk about the chilling effect of online abuse, that it forces people to leave the social media platforms and sometimes to leave public life. Have you seen this? Have people talked to you about this?
Yeah, I think for people who experience online abuse, particularly women, they don't realise it has a chilling effect. They've internalized the trauma, and I don't use that word lightly. I think that online abuse, and there's many aspects of it that is very violent and traumatic. A lot of people who've been targeted, survivors and victims, don't realise it had a chilling effect on them. In our workshops, we deliver digital resilience training to all women in public life. So whether you want to be a YouTuber or a politician or Instagram influencer, we provide training on digital self-care and self-defence. And we have pre and post workshop surveys. And actually 40% of the women that came to our workshop said that they censored themselves online, and they didn't realise that they did. They didn't realise that it was having a quieting effect, that they didn't really mention the word feminism, they didn't really speak about their views on something, they didn't really engage in the platform the way that they would. And I use a scenario around offline public spaces, because that is what the internet is and what social media platforms are. It's an online public forum. It's not a website. It's actually where we're now having debate, where we're now holding politicians to account, where policies are being discussed online. I use a scenario around, if I was walking to work down a busy Oxford Street, everyone knows Oxford Street, going to work, and I was catcalled, harassed, or even worse, sexually assaulted, would you tell me, as the woman that was targeted, that is a victim, to no longer walk down Oxford Street to go to work? And that's exactly what we say to women when we say ignore it, block it, turn your platform private. We're actually blaming women for the behaviours of other people. And I think that's really important when we look at the chilling effect. And actually that's having a huge impact on our democracy, because women will tell me, I don't really want to get into politics now because of abuse. And there's loads of research, particularly from the National Democratic Institute based in Washington, but do work with women in public life all over the world, that research the impact online abuse on women politicians was having, not only on the candidates and how well they did in elections, but also it put off voters. And secondly, it was having an impact on the next generation of young women who were seeing these politicians getting abused, and they were now rethinking entering politics. And there's loads of exit surveys. There's one done by an organisation in Canada. There's exit surveys or interviews, done with former politicians, and they all say, if I knew the online abuse that I was going to receive, I probably wouldn't have stood.
On a personal level, what is the impact of online abuse on a person? What do you hear?
So not only does it have a chilling effect, again, Amnesty's research through their toxic Twitter report, which we were part of, and I was a part of with my case, showed there was a psychological impact, that women were facing anxiety and fear, and that they were changing the way they use the platforms. And we are also seeing the impact in young people as well. We're seeing the increase of young people self-harming or taking their lives. I was part of Amnesty International's Right for Rights campaign last year, and very, very fortunate to have thousands and thousands of people write me letters in solidarity with me and what I had gone through, and use that to write to Jack Dorsey, who still hasn't responded, by the way. I'll come back to the role of social media companies in a moment. But I received this one letter by a woman who I'm going to call Nana, and she says something like, "Dear Seyi, thank you for all that you do with Glitch. I am an old 70-year-old who has no interest in being on Twitter, but I wanted to write to you to let you know that my niece committed suicide, so I know how important it is to end online abuse." And I talk about that story all the time, because it reminds people what we're talking about. It isn't snowflake generation that can't handle robust debate. It isn't sensitive women who are trying to find a way of attacking men and making them feel bad about patriarchy or whatever. It isn't. All of that is a distraction. What we're talking about here is actually life and death and the quality of life online. And I think social media companies must play a better role in providing a duty of care to every single user. And I mean that when I say every single user, because actually their framing of mind seems to be around a white middle class male who uses the platform. And let's not forget who runs these social media platforms. They're probably catering to people who look like them. And if you look at the demographic makeup of the companies, it's not that diverse, although they are getting better, but not a rate that it needs to be. They aren't intersectional. They aren't looking at where black women will face colorism. They're not looking at where trans communities would face dead naming. They're not looking at the fact that the use of videos and the use of memes, they're not keeping up with what is obviously targeted, organised harassment. And if we do not wake up to the fact that this is it, we are going to allow online abuse to get worse, our platforms and online public spaces to become more toxic, and it will mean that we'll see a generation of people that will not enter or engage in the online public space.
Thank you very much, Seyi.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening to OECD Podcast. To find out more about Glitch, go to fixtheglitch.org and have a look at OECD's Going Digital site.
Thank you for listening to OECD Podcasts. To listen to more OECD podcasts, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud.com/OECD.